We will not meet again until May. Yes. Right. Okay. All right. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord God, we ask that you send the power of your Holy Spirit to us to enlighten our minds, to touch our hearts, that what we're about to see and watch and discuss may lead us deeper into the mystery of your love and your grace and your goodness. Help us to understand in this story our own call to be among the chosen and to be able to go and tell others of your love and your mercy. We pray as you have taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. So before we're going to actually see today is the calling of another one of the apostles. So, but I want to give you a little background from what we discussed last week to be able to understand who he is, what he represents, where he's coming from, and therefore what his background is. Because we have to remember, we just know them as names of these 12 apostles, and we kind of make them all the same. And part of the great gift of the chosen is that it helps us to realize they were very individual people who had their own personalities, their own idiosyncrasies, sometimes their own obsessions in different ways, and their own emotions. And that they were not this bland band of brothers, as it were, but they were a motley crew who really weren't fond of each other. And the only thing they really had in common was their love for Jesus and their hope for the Messiah. And that they all felt privileged to be able to be counted in that company, to be chosen, as it were. So they come from many different backgrounds. And to appreciate the call of Simon in today's episode, I think we need to understand their place in the Gospels. So in the time in which our Lord lived and the events of the gospel took place, there were 4 different types of groups among the Jewish people. Now, the first of them, the one that we know most because they're always trying to trap him, are the Pharisees. They're the teachers of the law. So the Pharisees are concerned with, what does the law say? How do people abide by that law? They were really the rubricists of their time. They wanted to make sure that everybody was doing what they were supposed to do. And they're continuing to try and trap Jesus in some way by the things that he says. So they're the ones who oftentimes will come up with a question, they're looking for his wisdom about the law, when what they're really trying to do is trap him, to get him to say something that they can hang him on. And that doesn't always happen. Hi there, Mary, how are you?
Are you interrupting me?
So no, I'll wait. So, yes.
Not yet.
The Pharisees, are they Jewish people?
All these groups are Jewish people. They are all Jewish people. The Pharisees, we would recognize, if we were living in that time, we would put them with white hats. They're the good guys. They're the good guys. They follow all the laws. You see them in the synagogue. They follow every letter of the law to its absolute end. But as the Lord says, they like the places of honor. They like to be noticed. They want people to realize that they follow the law. So they don't really care what the law means. They just wanted people to go, oh, they follow the law. They're holy and I'm not. And that's what Jesus continues to challenge them on, which is why they resent him and they want to destroy him. The other group are known as the Sadducees. Oops. If I could spell that. So the Sadducees were connected to the cult or the worship in the temple. So oftentimes they were in opposition to each other. The Pharisees were more concerned with what the law said, and the Sadducees tended to be more about what the law requires as far as worship and adoration of God. And so, see, the Pharisees, the priestly class of the Jewish people was not something you could choose to be when you grow up. In order to be a priest by the Jewish religion, you had to be a son of Levi. You had to be born of the tribe of Levi, or a Levite. So they are the priests, and they're priests by the very virtue of their birth. So we know that Zechariah, who's the father of John the Baptist, was a Levite, because when the angel Gabriel comes to him, he's in the temple offering incense. Only Levites could do that. And if you were born to the tribe of Levi, even though you weren't a professional, you had to give 2 weeks of service to the temple, just by the fact of who you are and to which tribe you were born. So that's why in the parable of the Good Samaritan, the Levite is going down from Jerusalem. It's an important detail because we don't know the geography. Jerusalem is it's at the top of the mountains. You leave there, you go down through the mountains in the desert to get to Jericho. Excuse me. The Samaritan going down to Jericho means he's left the city of Jerusalem. When the Levite is coming down from Jerusalem, we know that he's left the temple. So he's going home because he's done his 2 weeks of service. So if he touches this wounded man, he has to turn around and go back to the temple to be cleansed. So he has to go back, wait a day to be able to be cleansed and purified, and then leave again. So it's probably another week before he sees his family. So we think, well, how could he just walk by him? Well, he had a family waiting for him, maybe even a job that needed him to be back for, in order to complete that. So it's not necessarily a selfish act. And he doesn't want to touch, because if he's dead, he can't do anything anyway. So that's why he passes by. And then when the guy behind him goes, well, he walked by, I'm walking by, they cross to the other side. So it tells you they're on the same side of the road. They're leaving Jerusalem and going home. So that's why that's an important, see, the details of the story are really important. They tell us, they told the people, and people would have understood that. A man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, they would have known. And when they said, the Levites saw him and went to the other side of the road, they went, well, yeah, because he wanted to go home. He missed his wife and his kids, and they probably needed him to get back to work because they didn't get paid for their temple service. That was part of their obligation as being a Levite. So the Sadducees are concerned about the worship and the temple. They're the ones who would be enraged at the cleansing of the temple when he overturns the tables and he releases the animals and all that chaos. The Pharisees are the ones who continue to trap him. They're the ones that drag the woman caught in adultery, the setup of yesterday's gospel, right? Did you read that yesterday? Is that the gospel you read? No, with Susanna? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Pharisees, and sometimes that's why when the gospel tells us that the Pharisees and the Sadducees come together, then you know that because they're natural enemies. That's like saying, the Democrats and the Republicans came to Jesus and said, and we come, yeah, it's not going to happen. Not in this kind. But it's a similar type of thing. They were naturally hostile to each other, but they had in Jesus a common enemy, because if he wins, they lose all their power in the religion. So they can't let him win. And they're willing to let each other fight him out. And then every now and then they'll get together. Oh yeah, that's a great thing. So they come together. Well, we'll trip him up on the taxes. Okay, well, do we pay the taxes or not? Do you have a coin? Oh yeah, well, you've got the coin. It's not mine. Give whoever image it is. So he flips it right back to them. And here they think they've got the perfect trap, and he traps them by their own foolishness in its own way. The other group that's part of this that we know of are called the Essenes. And they were the Jewish monks of that time. They lived a very aesthetic lifestyle. Excuse me. sorry, they lived a celibate life. They spent most of their days in fasting and prayer. The Dead Sea Scrolls that we know of are believed to have been copied and written by the Essenes, that on the edge of the Dead Sea, they had this, we would liken to a monastery, because it wasn't a monastery, because it wasn't Christian, but they had this settlement where they would, where members provided for each other. So they had their own cafeteria, their own gardens, they had people who did their own cooking. But their major work was to copy the scrolls of the Torah and to be able to study them. And so, but they lived a very austere lifestyle. They lived removed from the culture of their time. And we believe that John the Baptist was an Essene, that he's probably the most famous of them. Because, and even for them, he was to the far right of the Essenes. He lived in the desert. He lived alone. And he lived, as we find out, he's Crazy John, right? He's Crazy John. So that because John was totally dependent upon God. And that's why, how do we know that by the way he's described. He wore nothing that was fabricated of human hands. His clothes were the skins of animals. Even his food was not cooked or prepared. He ate it raw, honey and locusts. That's not my idea of a really good time, but I'd much rather have a blueberry muffin and a cup of coffee. But John would never eat that because it requires human involvement. You have to grind the beans, you have to brew the coffee, you have to grind the flour. Those, even though they're natural products, there's human work. And so John would have nothing to do with that. John was totally and absolutely dependent upon God. He ate nothing that was touched by human hands. And even the way he dressed was as basic as it comes in so many ways. Okay, so he's a radical Essene, but there are a substantial group among that as well. The last group, the one that we're going to meet today, are the Zealots. Okay, and they really are in some ways the spiritual descendants of the Maccabees. All right, so Judas Maccabeus and his brothers. There are two books in our Catholic Bible, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. All right, if you pick up a Protestant Bible, it's not there. They're what are known as the Deuterocanonical books. And so what they are, the Maccabees lived about 200 to 300 years before the time of Christ. At that point, Alexander had overtaken, and the empire of Alexander stretched from the Mediterranean Sea all the way into the Far East. It wrapped itself around the Mediterranean shore and also invaded most of Egypt. And so he was a brilliant military man, left no descendant. And so when he died, they fought among and divided up his country and his empire, actually. And at that point, then the Romans came in and took over. But part of what Alexander did was he unified his empire, not simply by law, but also by culture. And so Hellenistic culture is the culture of Alexander the Great. So anybody that did commerce at that time had to have some understanding of Greek. So, and to realize that the New Testament, you would think it's the 1st century, the Romans ruled that area. The 1st century would be written in Latin. It wasn't. It was written in Greek. The original texts of our New Testament were written in Greek. They were never written in Latin until the 4th century with St. Jerome. And St. Jerome translated it from the Greek into the vulgar language, which was the common language of the people, which was Latin. And then that translation was in the Middle Ages translated into English under King James. So that's why they consider the official English version is the King James version. But actually, it's not a very good translation because you've gone from Greek to Latin to English. And if you know anything about language, the further you get away from it, the less precise it becomes. And so we're having a translation of a translation in the King James Version. And we don't, and the Douay version, which is what Catholics used in the 20th century, went back to translate from the original Vulgate into English. So that was the Douay version. Most of us, as I look around the room, Jonathan and Luis are probably excluded, read the Douay version of the Bible as a Catholic version. And then it was Pope Pius XII in the 1950s who promoted through Divino Afflante Spiritu. No, he says the word of God is the truth. Go back to the original. He's the one that began in the 1950s that we would go back and discover the original texts. So he's the one that, the Pius XII is the one we can credit to the fact that our translations since Vatican II are very different. So because we go back to the original Greek and we translate directly from the Greek or the Hebrew into English. Now up here, there's the Jerusalem Bible, which was a big favorite in the 70s. That's a translation from the Greek to the French to English. Okay, and so it was translated into French in the École Biblique, which is still in Jerusalem. So it's a very, very famous biblical school, but it's staffed by French scholars who translated from the original texts into French and then from French into English. So it's more authentic than the King James version to the translation, but it's still, that's, so sometimes when you look down at people read the Bible and you go, that's not what my Bible says. Why? Because the only actual text is in Greek. And so it was translated from Greek into Latin and then into English or to other languages, but now in the latter part of the 20th century, we translated from the original texts. The point of that is to realize that the book of Maccabees, by the 2nd century before Christ, was never written in Hebrew. It was written in Greek because that was the predominant culture of the time. And so in the Middle Ages, when Luther decided to purify the church, his way to purify was that if a book of the Old Testament was not written in Hebrew, he threw it out. So the Maccabees were thrown out. 1st and 2nd Chronicles, thrown out. Because they were never written in Hebrew, they were only written in Greek. Yet to say, well, okay, but the Maccabees are the ones, so I think it helps to understand whose Simon is and what's driving him if we know this backstory to the Maccabees and to the Zealots. So the Maccabees, at one point when Alexander came and took over Jerusalem, he stepped into the temple and then he defiled the temple by placing statues to the Greek gods. And of course, to him, the great Greek god was none less than Alexander the Great. So that was offensive. Here is a human being represented in marble or stone in the temple where the presence of God dwells, and it was defiled. And so, he prohibited Jewish worship. So Judas Maccabees and his brothers eventually overtook the temple. They threw out the Greek soldiers, and when they did, they needed to be able to start the fire for the sacrifice. But the fire had to be, it took a week to be able to bless the oil that was used for the sacrifice. And there was only 1 day of oil left. So they burnt the oil for 1 day, but it lasted for 8 days. Right, so one light that lasts for 8 days is the Feast of Hanukkah. So what our Jewish brothers and sisters celebrate as Hanukkah comes from the action of Judas Maccabees, that they had oil for 1 day, and God made the miracle that it lasted for 8 until they could consecrate the oil they needed for the sacrifice to rededicate the temple in order to be able to offer sacrifice. So the Zealots were the terrorists of their time. All right. Their concern, what they were doing was they believed they were expecting the Messiah to be a military leader who is going to come, and they're training to be the army that he will lead to overthrow a foreign oppressor. As they overthrew Alexander the Great 2 centuries before, they would now overthrow Caesar and the Roman army to establish Israel as the greatest nation on the face of the earth. So their perspective is, given their history, that they are now the spiritual descendants of the Maccabees. Okay, so they have inherited that responsibility. And their perspective is that they are there to engage in a holy war. And that what their job is, with however means possible, in order to be able to destroy the enemy, who is Rome, because they believe human beings are gods, and therefore they will destroy them to set up the one true God of Israel. And while we may think that this is ancient and that the Bible history is antiquated and we're more sophisticated, all you have to do is look at today's news. Okay, this is the very same thing that is driving Putin. He's being inspired and encouraged by the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church in Kirill, who believes that we are pagans, that we are sinful, and that we need to be destroyed at any cost and by any means. So when we think, oh my God, this is hundreds of years ago, why do we care? It repeats itself in every generation, because there are maniacal people who think, maniacal people who continue to think that they are like the zealots, the hand of God, who can use any means possible in order to be able to restore God's purpose and plan. So yes, it's biblical history, and it may seem to be ancient history, but Simon lives in every generation, as you will see. And the Lord needed his passion as well as his zeal. So a zealot is somebody who is zealous, and that they will do anything in order to achieve God's purpose. All right, so we're going to see how the Lord steps into Simon's life through his brother Jesse and totally turns his world upside down and inside out, and he cannot figure it at all. And that's another issue with the other disciples. Now you've got, you thought Matthew was a problem. Wait till they get Simon, who's not an enemy, but they're trying to be able to rein Simon in. No, that's not the way we do things. Whoa. You'll see that in the next 4 episodes once we get back into May. All right. Yes. Done.
You mentioned that Pope Pius XII went back to the Greek, but then you said Greek and Hebrew. Is it possible that some of the texts in Greek were lost and they pulled out the Hebrew version? Or?
Well, the Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew. The Torah was written in Hebrew. So when we're talking about anything before 200 BC, it was only written in Hebrew. And under Alexander, it was translated into Greek. And so it's what's known as the Septuagint. All right, and oftentimes in references, it's abbreviated by the Roman numerals for 70. The tradition is that at one point they gathered 70 scholars into a locked room, left them there for 70 days, and they all came out with the same translation. Okay, it's probably more miraculous than it. So, but that's the tradition of the Septuagint. So it was originally written in Hebrew, and then it was translated into Greek, and then from there translated into other languages. So that's why when Martin Luther began with the Reformation, if it wasn't originally in Hebrew, but only in Greek, he threw it out. Because that's what they had at that point, the more common. See, in the first century, you didn't have anything in Latin. the texts that they passed, Paul wrote his letters not in Latin. He wrote them, and he didn't write them in Hebrew. He wrote them in Greek. That was the language of commerce, to understand that. And we may think, well, but it was a Roman world, and they were Greeks who spoke Aramaic. They were Hebrews and Jews that spoke Aramaic. But the common language was Greek. And so, of course, in our modern world, the common language is English. In order to be a pilot for any airline, you have to be able to be fluent in English. Because if you're flying all around the world, how do they communicate with each other? They have to be able to speak in English. That is the common language of air traffic control. So if you grow up in China, or you grow up in Germany, or you grow up in Colombia, you have to be able to function in English. That's why Oneida, you know Oneida, her grandson came to the United States. He was a pilot in Colombia, but he had to learn English in order to be in the military. He had to learn English in order to be a commercial pilot. That's the universal language of aviation. So in the first century, that common language of commerce and of business and of trade and diplomacy was in Greek. They didn't have automatic translation. Okay, you know, so when you realize when for my meeting in Rome, we had to fill in what's your first language, so that when we get there, they have tables. Okay, the Pope's going to speak in Italian. There'll be a table for Spanish and for French and for English and for German and for Polish. All right, and you have to pick. So they know how many translators, and what you do is a little set, like if you've ever been on a tour, get a little battery pack, you put the earphones on, and while the Pope is talking in Italian, the person's telling you in your ear what he's saying in your native language. They didn't have simultaneous translation in the first century. So they all had to know the same language. That was just the way it had to be in order to be able to function. So that's where the whole challenge, that's why for Pilate, when he puts the inscription up, of course, his language as a Roman, the legal language is Latin, but he wants the Jews to know, so he puts it in Hebrew, so because he wants them to know, yeah, I want you to know what this man's crime is. And then he puts it in Greek, because then anybody going in and out of the city knows who he is and what he did. That's why those three languages are there. Okay. And if you ever get to Rome, in Santa Croce de Gerusalemme, the Church of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, the relic of that placard is in the chapel there. And you see the three languages that it was written. Okay. Any questions yet?
I just want to say your knowledge is amazing. But anything that you described really adds to this one coming up. So much stuff. I had no idea. When you described the difference in the Pharisees.
Well, now when you see Simon and you see, of course, how it opens, you're going to understand, like, why is he doing this? Because he's driven. Simon is driven by his zeal and what he believes is the truth and what God is calling him to in this particular thing. Although he doesn't expect Jesus to be who he is as a result of that. Okay, good. Any questions at home? No?
What happened to the Pharisees and the Sadducees?
The Pharisees, well, the Sadducees eventually, when the temple was destroyed, they had no role. So they just blended in among the Jewish people. The Pharisees are really the spiritual ancestors to today's rabbis. Okay, so they're the rabbis. The Essenes, of course, died out because they were celibate. And the Zealots, well, the Zealots are still around. We know them today as, the Zealots have a different name now. Because they're about the reestablishment of Zion as Israel, as the great nation. And there's a group probably between here, and they might be here, I don't know, but that are working supposedly to rebuild the temple. They claim if they can take control of the Temple Mount, they will rebuild the temple. Why? Well, because the Messiah has to enter into the temple. So if they believe he isn't here yet, they have to rebuild it. Well, we believe he's already come. So that's part of our disconnect with them today. All right? When they're, I'm sorry, I forgot. Sorry. So when they're having the dance and Jesse's lying there looking at them all in the circle, and Jesse looks over and sees Simon looks over and sees his brother. So he makes his friends come around and they include him in the circle. So all the things that he does, Simon continues to include his brother Jesse. And those are those opening scenes. Those are those two brothers. And then Simon is called to become a zealot with the note that he's given. And so he leaves his note. When they play the game at night, the mother comes in and she puts the candle out because she and the father have gone to bed and they're still playing a game. And then the next night they play the game again, only this time when he wakes in the morning, Simon's gone and he's left a note on his bed. Okay, so then Jesse realizes his brother's gone. So he goes to the pool, but every time the water stirs, he can't get there.
He was always up there.
Should have been down closer.
Although she is good, that one was that.
That's right. Or why don't you just roll down the steps? It's all part of the story. So the point is, and then what happens is they're giving you the passage of time, and it's the contrast of their life. I mean, it's part of the storytelling, because Jesse's he's paralyzed. His legs are dead, and he's lying next to the pool, and he's trying to get there. And you see him age.
Yeah.
You know, his beard gets bigger. There starts to be gray hair. He seems to grow weaker and dirtier. You can almost, I mean, there are points where you can almost smell it from the screen. And the contrast to that is Simon, who's becoming more physically fit, who becomes the perfect warrior. And then, of course, we flip to the scene, and you see what looks to us like this scene in a village. And there's they spill the apples and they light the cart on fire, and Jesse pulls out the knife, and you think who's going to kill him? Well, it's all a guerrilla tactic. It's all the practice. He's in the zealot camp learning how to be an assassin. And so watching the whole thing up on the hill is who? You didn't realize it. Did you notice that as they show the scene, and then the leader says, well, Simon, let's go get something to eat. It's time for dinner. And then they cut up, and you see that on the top of the hill is Atticus. And he says, oh, murder school. Well, we will see you again, Simon. So he knows him. He knows that he's an assassin because he's watched him being trained. And he also knows the ruse. They spill the apples, they light the hay on fire, and they know what to do. So when Simon comes to Jerusalem, Atticus is waiting. So, and they tip us off because the Roman soldier says to the other, well, look who's over there. Well, who is that? I don't know who he is. Oh, he's the lead Roman investigator. Really? How do you know? Oh, trust me. You know, they've been around. You just don't know them. You know, they're like the marshals on the plane. They're on all our planes. You just don't know them because they blend in. He said, but that's Atticus. He says, he said, what is he doing here in this part of the country? And, you know, with all of this. And so then Atticus sees Simon the Zealot come up. He says to him, well, where are you going? What's your business? And he says, I'm going to the inn to Nina Fortress. And he says to nobody lives there. You're done. Forget it, you know. You just let a terrorist through the border. Get out of here. So he now knows Simon's there, and he knows what Simon's going to do. He's going to create a ruse where they're going to spill the apples, light the hay on fire, and then he's going to assassinate him. So he's figured it out that they know what is Rufus's plan. And so he goes, so that's when he meets with Petronius, who comes in the disguise that's ridiculous. He's all dressed in his white Roman robes and he's thrown this black thing over him. And Atticus is annoyed. Well, if I knew you were coming dressed like a Roman senator, I'd have met you in the public square. You know, I don't get paid to blend in. I don't get paid to blend in. You know, and he says, you need to change your routine. He won't change. You know, it's like, he's the boss. I can't get him to do that. You know, well, why don't you just arrest the terrorist? No, because then he's a hero. Why don't you just torture him? Because then he's a hero. Okay, so he says, I want to catch him in the act because then they have no story to take glory in. And they go back and realize we won because we're better. The same story, 20th century, right? That's what we're trying to do with the terrorists of our own time. So you just change the government, change the location. It's 20 centuries old than what we're looking at, okay? So then we cut back to the fact that, of course, it's the Feast of the Booths. And so they're laying another layer. So who designed the booth? Who designed this temporary shelter? Nathaniel. Okay, we met Nathaniel last week, right? He's the architect because everything collapsed. He's the architect. And that's what Matthew says to him. Well, this is really nice, he says, but it's not going to keep out the rain. No, it's not supposed to keep out the rain. And then you have that wonderful interplay between all of them about what we heard today in the first reading about how they wandered through the desert and God provided for them and took care of them. And even Mary shares about how often she slept out at night and how it reminds her about even through all of that wandering of her own life, God protected her and took care of her. She said, it reminds me of where I was and that when I didn't think God was there, he was taking care of me. Wonderful level about Mary and her relationship with God and in Jesus and how she understands that. Then we come back to the city and Simon is on the temple and he hears them talking about the lame will walk and that God will vindicate them. And so it startles him as it did when he was in the zealot camp. If you remember when they're having the dinner with the leader, he says, you have to go to Jerusalem and there your brother will tell you what to do. My brother? And he's thinking, my brother's a paralytic. What do you mean my brother? No, your brother is zealot, has other brothers that will take care of you. And so Simon goes, oh, it's not my blood brother, it's my spiritual brother. But that's what triggers him. And when he goes to see his brother. What a wonderful interaction between them. So they told him, he said, they told me I would find you here.
But he said that it wasn't your brother the zealot, not your brother.
Right, you mean where Simon knew where to go?
Yeah.
They gave him a place where to go to find the zealot.
Yeah.
And that's when he went in one house and then he went down and underneath. Okay. And then Atticus watched the light go through the sewer. Yeah. So he knew he had gone from this side to that side.
But so how did he know where to go find his brother in the pool?
They told him. How did Simon notify Jesse? When he got there, he said, they told me I would find you here. I don't know who he asked. We don't know. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, but then during the whole play, I'm sorry to jump ahead, but then the interaction between Jesse and Simon later on, when they finally meet, Jesse tells Simon, all these years, you know, I was here, but you never.
That's what Jesse says to Simon. Yeah. So you've come every year to the festival,
but you don't say hello to me.
Right. And what does Simon say? What's he tell him why I never came?
He didn't want to go.
And he says, first of all, you know we can't come because this is a pagan site.
Oh, because it was.
And he's about purifying Judaism. Mm-hmm. And secondly, he says, I was embarrassed.
I was embarrassed. Okay.
God does not make us as sick people fight amongst each other in order to get to the pool first. I'm embarrassed. This is pagan. Okay. God is not here. I couldn't come. I only came to say goodbye because I didn't do it right the first time. And so goodbye.
Because he assumed he was going to be killed because he was going to kill.
Because he was told,
Yeah.
do this job or don't ever come back.
Mm-hmm.
So you either kill him or you are killed.
Okay.
And as he comes in, he realizes even if I kill him, I will be killed. His point was once I kill him, they'll kill me. So, and I think he was looking at like, well, that will be better than the crucifixion. Yeah. Whether that's why he pauses as he looks at the crucifixion. And so then when he stands up to leave, Jesse pulls out the note and he reads to him. So now we know what he wrote to say to him. And he said, I was a much better writer then. And he quotes the very same scripture that he heard on the steps of the temple, which is what brought him to find his brother, that the lame shall walk. And then he says to him in the note 25 years before, when I see you standing on your own 2 feet, I will know that the Messiah has come. That's what he wrote to him. So that's why when the Lord gets there, he's like, well, nobody will let me in and I can't get, no. I'm not asking you about whose fault this is, about who helps you, who doesn't help you, I'm not asking about any of that. You don't need that. You don't need this pool. All you need is me. Look at me. Just look at me. Do you want to be healed? I was like, of course I do. Then stand up. And then he feels it in his legs. And he stands. The wonderful way it's presented. You know, the pick up your mat. And what happens then is, if you notice, this time it's not Simon, it's Big John, who pulls out his book and starts to take the notes.
It wasn't Matthew.
It wasn't Matthew, I'm sorry. It was Big John because, of course, that was last week's story. Last Tuesday was Big John's story about the man being healed at the pool. John's the one taking all the notes. And then, of course, the villain's there, Shmuel, S-C-H-M-U-E-L, Shmuel, who's watching and horrified. Oh, you know, and then, of course, and then at the end, Simon asks that great question, you know, so after 25 years, what would be 30 minutes? What was the big deal? You couldn't wait for Sabbath to end. But we know why he couldn't wait, because if he had waited, his brother would be dead. His brother would be dead.
Yeah.
He had to do it before sundown because that's when Simon was going to kill Rufus. And he had just enough time. I mean, that's where it all, you see the whole episode converge in that intersection. All that he practiced with the zealots in the camp, with the fire and the spilling of the fruit, and he's got the dagger ready to go, and Atticus standing next to Rufus and his wife, who's, you know, oh, you look so glowing tonight. Don't push it. Because she knows he's putting her life in danger. He refuses to change his routine, even though he knows that he is putting her life at risk as well as his own, because he's the Roman. Nobody's going to tell him what to do. And because Atticus said, I'm sure that, you know, she would follow my plan before Rufus will. Well, 10 denarii, I don't need the money. I'm just trying to make a point. She values her life, you know, and he doesn't value her life. So that's the whole interaction between them. So the whole episode converges in that one scene. And so as he reaches for the dagger, Simon looks beyond Rufus and he sees Jesse standing and walking like, where's my brother? He told me he was in the upper city. Bumping into people. Oh, I haven't done this in a long time. You know? And then he walks out because he can't believe it. And here's his brother standing on 2 feet. So now he abandons what he was planning to do because his brother has reminded him, this is his son, this Messiah is here. Yeah. So over and over, the story's telling us the Messiah is here. And and then Peter brings the whole thing back to say, well, why couldn't you wait a half an hour? Why anger Shmuel? And why get everybody upset? What, after 25 years, what would be a half an hour? His brother would be dead. Yeah. Every minute counts. happens. God knows. God knows the way our lives intersect. It all fits in a remarkable way. All right. Now do you understand the episode?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's the thing. There are so many layers, and they converge them. They weave them all in together at the end. And now, of course, they're going to weave it when we come back in May. We pick up with Simon, who wants to know, who is this guy? I got to be part of this group. So then Simon has to find Jesus. And of course, Atticus is really annoyed now because he didn't get to get it. So, but see, and it's a key point. Of course, I missed it the very first time I saw it. Is who's on the hill? Because you don't know. He's not dressed as a Roman soldier. That's Atticus, who's going to find him later. So that's how he knows who Simon is, because he's seen him in the training camp. And that's how he knows it. And that's how he knows what's going to happen, because he's seen the whole thing play out as it was practiced in the camp. So that when you don't know who Atticus is, you miss the point of how he knows and where the stories go.
Father.
Yes, last one. This is your third.
I know, it's not a question.
All right.
It's just like what I want to say. We're all like a puzzle, and we all fit in and everything. And I have said to myself over the years, it's almost like a checkerboard too, and Jesus moves all the pieces around, and we're all like a puzzle.
Right.
And not for nothing, we're all connected. We're really all connected.
Absolutely are.
So I've seen series 1, all 8 of them, series 2, all 8 of them, and I thought I got it, and I did get it pretty much, but coming here the last couple of weeks, because I couldn't come before because I took care of my lady friend, I'm getting it even more. So thank you very much.
Well, there are many layers to it. So, and even if you go back now and watch it again, there's going to be another whole layer that you see. Because now when you see Atticus, then you know who he is. You see him before you know who he is. You see him in the story then. And you also know that now you know who Simon and Jesse are, because you know we're going to follow them all the way through. They start as young boys and they grow up together, but there's a difference between them. So, there's 14 years between them, I think he said. Yeah.
I thought the mother died in childbirth, though. I never thought she died in childbirth. No, you remember the baby came, when Simon came, I thought that.
And it may be, I was distracted at that point. I'd have to go back and watch those details.
Yeah, I thought the mother went like this, and then somebody came over and said, no, did she die in childbirth?
Yeah, she did.
So that's why the father remarried. So they're half brothers. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's amazing the way when you were describing the fact that everything, God puts everything in place. That same thing goes for our lives. That's the way he puts, certain people in our path, certain events, circumstances. There's a reason.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Father, I was wondering what Simon was thinking when he looks up and sees all those men on the cross. Jesus.
Well, and that's why, if you notice, at one point he comes back, he's walking across the city wall, and he looks down at the crucifixion, because he's steeling himself to be able to do the work that he's going to do. And again, that's the other conversation between he and Jesse. Jesse makes the comment, Simon makes the comment to Jesse about how this is pagan, and how could God, pit sick people against each other to climb over each other to get into the water first. And Jesse comes back at him, oh, so God's better, that he teaches us to slit each other's throats and kill each other? Well, I'm purifying I'm thinking of you. No, you're not. You're serving your own purpose and your own understanding of God.
I was just wondering what was going through Jesus.
When Jesus is,
when
he comes
he
back.
was, and they did it very slowly.
Right.
And what was he feeling?
Well, it makes you realize he knows where his life is going.
Yeah.
He certainly does. Yeah. All right, next week will be Holy Week, so we won't meet. And then I'm not here for the 2 weeks after that. We'll meet May 3rd. Feast of Philip and James. The Apostles, that's the Apostles' feast.
Of course that's in your head.
All right. You are very welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.